Now that we have some boundaries set for our player character, we can go back to the code and we kind of look at it. We say that right now we are going in, we're saying, if it's going to a position, then we're going to hold it at that position. But there is a good possibility that somewhere in the API there's a function that's built in that allows us to hold something into an area or clamp something between two values. So let's go in and take a look and see if we can find something that's similar to that. So if we check for a clamp, we can see that we've got a math class right here, and we've got a function inside that's for clamping. So let's go in and take a look, and the description lets us know that it's going to clamp a value between a minimum float variable and a maximum float variable. So that means that if we look at the function, we can put the variable we want, and that variable would be what? That would be our transform position x, and we're going to clamp it between a minimum, which would be 6, and a maximum, which would be our -6, or vice versa. And that lets us actually hold that player object between 2 points. So let's use this one, and we can actually cut down on a lot of what we've got here. Instead of writing out 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, we can get down to just one simple little function. So let's give ourselves just a little bit of space right here. We're going to just drop those down some. And what we want to do, we're just using the mathf.clamp function. And we're going to be making this equal to what? We're going to be trying to work with our transform position.x. We don't actually have to check for if something because we're actually using this function to hold us between a minimum and a maximum. So we're simply going to make our transform position .x equal the clamp value that we're going to set up. So we're going to make it equal to our math f dot clamp, and then open close, and inside of here we're going to fill out our arguments, and these are going to be what we're actually trying to clamp, the value, and then our min and our max. So we'll go back in, we'll say this is going to be our transform position x for our value, and we're going to clamp it between the 6 and -6. And that right there does everything that we set up right in here. So with that in place, let's go ahead and get rid of that one. Let's save it. Let's try it out. Make sure it does what we want it to do. We'll go back over. No errors over here. We'll hit play. And we can see that we've got what? It's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Why? Because if we look into here, we make sometimes those simple mistakes where we might put our negative and our positive in the wrong positions. So if you get an effect like that, just be sure to go back to and say, okay, well, what's my minimum? It's like, wait a second, my negative is my minimum, and the 6 is going to be my positive. So we save that back out. We go back and we check. And no crazy actions happening this time, but we can tell that we get to the 6 and the 6, and it locks us in and stops us there. And without having to do a bunch of if statements, we're just using the function that's available in the math class. Alright, let's go ahead and also set up our y position. So we're going to do this with a y. So transform.position.y equals the math clamp and the transform position of y for a negative, what we have is a 4. So let's go with our -4 and +4. And we can get rid of that little block of code. We'll save that one out. We'll go back over to Unity and hit play. And let's test it out. We're clamped in good left and right, and up and down. So here, with 2 lines of code, we're able to set the limits for our player's position. Now the next thing we can look at is, right now, if we look at our player object. Our player object, we've got our speed for the vertical and the horizontal, and we can adjust that inside of our inspector from a perspective as a designer. If we go into here, this is where we need to start thinking about From a design perspective of systems that we create, what do we need to expose for a designer? What's important to a designer? What's something that is going to be changed that we don't want to have to go back through the code to actually change it? So learning to make good decisions in the beginning is going to be helpful to making much more complex types of systems. And a lot of it goes down to what's important to a designer, what does a designer need, what's going to be affecting how the game actually plays, so that we're not revisiting those kinds of scripts. In here, we can look and we see that the boundaries we have set, we've hard-coded it in with a value, and that means that if we're going to ever change this, let's say we just had to change it negative 6.123. We'd have to come back to the script and actually change that up to make that the value that we want. Let's say we changed our screen resolution and then we needed to change this position. Well, the easy way here for us is just to add in additional variables that a designer can use. So let's go in and say we'll have a variable for our horizontal position, min and max. So let's just call this we'll call it our horizontal HOR min, and we'll make this a float. And in fact, we'll keep it a float just in case we have to get close to a point. We could make it an integer. And we'll set this at the default for what we've got, which is a -6. And we'll make another variable. We'll call this one our horizontal max float, and we'll make this equal to our +6. And then let's make another variable. We'll call this our vertical min, and this is going to be our -4.0, and our variable vertical max, and this will be our float for the positive boundary. So here we're just setting up variables that we can plug in to the designer, or plug in for the designer, and make it a little bit easier on adjusting and tweaking that part of the game, because that does affect gameplay. So we're just going to copy and paste each one of these right over the hard-coded variable. So now we're exposing this to the designer. We're making it easier for a designer to get in and actually work with. And we'll save it, make sure we haven't any typos, nothing in our console. We'll double check our script for our player, and we can look in here and we see that we've got our speeds for our vertical and horizontal. Now we've got our horizontal min and max, and we've got our vertical min and max. So nice and easy here. We can just tweak those variables and do whatever it is we need to make them work for our game. And with that, I believe we've got our code set up in a way that is a little more precise, and we've got the values set up and exposed to the designer to make adjusting our game space relatively more easy.